From London, this is the Standard Podcast, and I'm Mark Blunden. Coming up, Ukraine has claimed responsibility for an e-scooter bomb which killed a top Russian general on Tuesday in Moscow. Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov, chief of Russia's nuclear, biological and chemical protection troops, was killed by an explosive hidden inside an e-scooter outside an apartment. The blast came a day after Ukrainian prosecutors charged Kirillov in absentia over alleged use of banned chemical weapons in Ukraine, which Russia denies. Russian state media reported that the bomb was triggered remotely and had the power equivalent of roughly 300 grams of TNT explosive. Tech and Science Daily's Rachel Abbott has the latest with the London Standard's defence editor Robert Fox.
Robert, what do we know about this bombing? Ukraine has claimed responsibility.
We know that it was at an apartment block where the general resided. It was quite an upmarket apartment, only 3 to 4 miles from the Kremlin. And he was coming out, and about 300 grams, so it must have been pretty good, of explosive concealed in the saddle of an e-scooter was triggered remotely and caused a huge hole in the entrance of the apartment block and, of course, killed the general and his assistant. What is so interesting is the sequence of events is that only 24 hours before, officially, Ukraine had accused him of war crimes for using chemical weapons on 4,600 munitions or instances. And within 24 hours, they killed him. And within 2 or 3 hours of that, the security service of Ukraine, through sources, as it were, let Reuters, Agence France Presse, the Associated Press numbered. They went to the agencies and said, yes, it was us, because, of course, they're looking for the maximum propaganda impact, particularly on the Russian public.
And what do we know about the general?
We know quite a lot because he's been very active. And by the way, he's been sanctioned by the UK and sanctioned graphically for using, in quotes, barbaric weapons back only in October. He appeared quite often on television, was known to be a close military associate, in other words, an advisor to Putin himself. And what is not clear is what kind of exotic weaponry he was preparing or prepared to use or training his troops to use, because his title is that he is in charge of the protection force for nuclear, biological and chemical weapons. And this raises a whole load of things about, is Russia going to use the ecological option and blow up or damage or cause a really bad disaster from the nuclear power stations in the crosshairs, in the target lines in Ukraine itself?
You've touched on it briefly, but what's the significance of him being targeted in this way?
It is clear now that Ukraine is running an assassination campaign, quite an effective one within Russia. And this has been going on almost since the main invasion began in February 2022. In the August of that year, there was a prominent bombing again of quite a well-known personality, Daria Dugina, and she was quite clearly not the target. The target was her father, Alexander, who is the great ideologue. He is the great propagandist of the Putin cause. He's an academic, but he appears frequently on television. The bomb was in his car, but he wasn't in it and she was driving.
With everything you've said, Robert, what do we know about how Putin himself is being protected?
It is multi-layered. This has become a specialist science amongst journalistic colleagues, particularly like Luke Harding, who's written very well about Ukraine and Russia, a legendary correspondent of The Guardian. He believes that they have squads. He has a Praetorian Guard, as in the old days, protecting the Roman emperor around him. Mostly, in some cases, it has been made of Chechens. This is where the Chechen warlord Kadyrov has really made his name. And there's a lot of deception goes on. And apparently what we're seeing on television isn't always Putin. According to Luke, there are at least 20 body doubles. To the extent, it's quite comic that when in June he went to talk to Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang, that certainly was Putin. But apparently by the time the visit had moved on to Vietnam, all the publicity photographs weren't Putin at all, but was the body double.
How will Russia retaliate?
Russia will retaliate. It will go with a spectacular. Zelensky's people said there have been at least 3 attempts on him. They'll be well aware of it. I'm not entirely sure what they'll do. They need to do something nasty because it's been propaganda-wise and physically not a good few weeks for Russia. Although they're grinding along slowly on the battlefront, it's not too good. They're losing numbers and particularly equipment in horrendous quantities at the moment. And even we're hearing now with some quite good anecdotal reporting of the North Koreans being thrown into the battle and not doing at all well and being really caught out in the open. And it's proving very, very difficult indeed. That it makes it boiling up for the in and around January the 20th when Trump comes in. But one thing that is becoming pretty plain, at least to me, is that Trump is not going to be able to achieve peace in Ukraine within 24 hours, as he said, because it probably isn't within his gift. He probably, whatever he does, it's going to be very, very difficult for him to stop the war. He could only stop the war if Putin really wants to. Putin doesn't want to. Putin has to score a win. It cannot be a draw or a home win. It's got to be a win, and he's getting more desperate about it.
Let's go to a quick break. Coming up in part 2, Prince Andrew China spy scandal. What we know so far with the London Standard's courts correspondent, Tristan Kirk. In the meantime, please do make sure to give us a follow and a rating. Welcome back. A High Court judge has ruled that the alleged Chinese spy at the heart of a scandal about access to Prince Andrew can now be named as Yang Tengbo. The 50-year-old became a close confidant of the Duke of York before being banned from the UK over national security fears that he could compromise the royal. The London Standard's courts correspondent Tristan Kirk reports how the scandal emerged late last week when a tribunal ruling revealed that an unnamed man, then known only by the alias H6, with suspected close ties to the Chinese state, had lost his appeal against the immigration ban. Yang has now been named publicly and issued a statement insisting that the allegations he is a spy are entirely untrue. For more on this case, we're joined now by Tristan Kirk. What do we know about Yang Tengbo, these allegations of spying for China, and how has he responded to the claims?
Yang Tengbo is a Chinese businessman with quite a lot of links to the UK, who was revealed this week to be the alleged Chinese spy who was closely associated with Prince Andrew. Now, this all came through a case before an immigration tribunal and him appealing against a ruling by the Home Office to ban him from coming to the UK. It all emerged without him being named, but yesterday he was identified for the first time, and he issued a statement saying that the allegations against him are not true. He's not a Chinese spy, and this is all a big misunderstanding by the Home Office, who suspected him of trying to leverage influence over Prince Andrew.
And what is the background on how this scandal blew up? It became public, and with Prince Andrew in the firing line again, allegedly for bad judgment, once more over the people he associates with. But there's also links to other parts of government, or also claims that other parts of government were, in quotes, infiltrated.
Well, this all came through a tribunal appeal ruling, which is a fairly extraordinary document, which may look innocuous to those who don't read into it. The alleged spy at the centre of this was originally referred to by a cipher, H6, and the allegation was that he had cultivated close links to Prince Andrew. The Home Office had stepped in, banned him from the UK, and he had appealed against that decision. Now, in the ruling, it set out that there were suspicions that Mr. Yang had close ties to the Chinese state, that he had become unusually close to Duke of York, and there were fears, genuinely held fears, that the royal and his extended network could be compromised by links to Mr. Yang. Now, since being identified, it can also be reported that he had enjoyed pretty extraordinary access to those at the top of British society. He was pictured with David Cameron, pictured with Theresa May, and as you would expect, as somebody who had such close links to a member of the royal family, he had access to high society, VIPs, politicians. And that was at the center of the Home Office's concerns, that if he was indeed a Chinese spy, which he denies, then this would be a really serious situation for the British government.
Tristan, where does this episode now leave the Duke of York? Is he likely to be questioned in some way, appear as a court witness?
Well, the tribunal dealt with the access to the royal family and the evidence by not calling the royal himself, but one of his advisors' evidence put forward in terms of letters that were written, raising the concerns about Mr. Yang's access, the way that he was apparently subverting the private secretaries, accused of getting people in and out of Windsor unseen, and potentially, as I say, leveraging that influence, having those close ties to the Chinese state, which he obviously says that he doesn't. But where does this leave Prince Andrew? Well, I mean, once again, in a terrible position, his judgment is being called into question. This all happened in and around 2020, 2021, when he was under the most intense scrutiny because of the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. He was being accused in the US of sexual misconduct. And so that was why the concerns were so acute, that here was a member of the royal family in pretty desperate situation, reaching out for any friend he could find, and potentially, so the ruling sets out, reaching out for somebody who wasn't actually a friend, but was looking to take advantage of.
What are the next steps now for the legal case and presumably a significant government investigation?
The tribunal can be appealed. The decision to exclude Mr. Yang from the country is something that's looking likely to be brought up again at the appeal stage, because he obviously says he's an international business with close links to the UK previously, and he wants to maintain that. He wants to be able to come and go through the country. But the fallout is much bigger than that, because this has sparked deep concerns within government about the access that somebody suspected of being a Chinese spy might have had. As I said, pictured with two former prime ministers, Mr. Yang was, and they'll be looking into what access he was able to get through the Duke of York and what influence he might have brought. This is a time when espionage, spying, and the activities of hostile states is actually under quite a lot of scrutiny. There is a Russian spy ring that was operating in the UK, which is currently being explored through an Old Bailey trial. There are allegations that a parliamentary aide was operating as a Chinese spy, and there are other suggestions of Russian espionage within the UK. So this is a dangerous time for the country, where there's a lot of attention on the activities of suspected agents of other countries who are hostile to our interests.
And that's The Standard. For the latest news, head over to standard.co.uk. This podcast is back tomorrow at 4 p.m.